Ash Hollow wasn't so much a town anymore as it was a collection of half-forgotten memories, clinging to the dry bones of the earth. Once stagecoaches rolled through its main street, and the blacksmith's hammer rang like a bell over the land. Now dust ruled everything. It seeped into every crack of the warped buildings and turned the sun's light into a tired, faded glow that struggled to touch the ground. The wind carried the scent of old wood, dry sage, and something else, a heaviness that clung to the skin. Mary Beth Calloway stood under the twisted branches of the hanging tree, her thin shawl doing little against the biting wind that rolled down from the canyons. Her face, pale and drawn, held the hollowness of someone too used to loss. Dirt streaked her cheeks, and her hair, once the color of summer wheat, hung in a tangled mess. Every bone in her body ached, though the worst of it came from a place no medicine could reach. She clutched a cracked locket in one hand, the other trembling at her side. The sun hung low in the sky, bleeding its last light into the jagged horizon. The shadows it left behind stretched long and thin, like the fingers of some reaching thing. No one from the town came near the tree anymore, not since the Crowley brothers made it their monument. 5 times it had claimed the lives of men they accused of crossing them, guilty or not. And now Mary Beth stood where her husband had hung. Her lips moved silently, the words broken and shapeless, part prayer, part memory. She didn't notice the figure watching her from the far end of the street, a tall shape leaning against the skeleton of what had once been a mercantile. The stranger's face stayed hidden beneath the brim of a dust-streaked hat, but the outline of a worn coat and a battered rifle strapped to his back was clear against the dusk. The town itself had retreated from its own streets. Shutters were bolted, lamps unlit. A saloon door swayed on one hinge, the faint clatter a lonely note in the silence. It was a place where hope went to die, and even the coyotes had stopped howling at its edge. Mary Beth's knees buckled, and she crumpled to the hard earth, clutching the locket to her chest. A coldness deeper than the evening air gnawed at her bones. She'd run out of places to go. The Crowleys had taken her home, burned it to the ground with her brother inside, and laughed while doing it. She'd fled here, to the one place she thought might shelter her, only to find the town as broken as she was. The wind kicked up dust, swirling it in small devils that danced along the road. Her vision blurred, darkness closing in. And then a shadow fell over her. A hand reached down, rough and scarred, the fingers steady. She forced her gaze upward. The stranger knelt before her, his face half lit by the dying sun. A beard lined a jaw as sharp as the hills beyond, and his eyes. God, his eyes were cold. Not cruel, but deep, like the earth after a long drought, and something older than pain rested in them. "You'll never be alone," he said, his voice low, the kind that rolled out of a man who spoke little but meant every word. He lifted her hand, closing it within his own. It was a simple thing, that touch, but it carried weight, enough to steady her. The sound of horses in the distance made them both turn, for riders crested a ridge to the west, dark figures against the blood-colored sky. Mary Beth's breath hitched. She knew those men by shape alone. The Crowley brothers, or some of their filth, come to finish what they'd started. No one else rode in Ash Hollow without their blessing. The stranger's gaze didn't leave them. His hand tightened around hers for a moment, then released. He stood and turned toward the coming riders, his movements unhurried, like a man with nothing left to fear. Dust clung to his coat, and his rifle shifted on his shoulder with a dull scrape. Mary Beth forced herself upright, leaning against the rough trunk of the tree. She didn't know this man, didn't even know his name, but something about the way he carried himself set a tremor in her chest that wasn't quite fear. The wind stilled. The town held its breath. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask him why, but the words tangled in her throat. He glanced back at her, a flicker of something in his expression. Not kindness exactly, but a promise. Then, without a word, he stepped into the street and moved toward the riders. The last of the sun slipped behind the hills, leaving Ash Hollow in deepening twilight. And somewhere in the pit of her heart, Mary Beth felt the first stirrings of something she'd thought dead. A spark, small and stubborn. The wind carried the scent of gun oil and storm-worn leather. The night was coming, and with it a reckoning. The sound of hooves striking hard earth broke, what little silence remained in Ash Hollow. Dust curled around the riders as they advanced, for shadows against the deepening dusk. Each man wore the same cruel grin, faces half lost beneath wide-brimmed hats and weather-beaten scarves. They rode with the careless confidence of men who'd never known the taste of consequence. Mary Beth pressed her back against the gnarled trunk of the hanging tree, feeling its rough bark bite into her skin. Her fingers gripped the edge of her shawl, though it did nothing to still the trembling in her bones. She knew them by name and by deed. Clayton Crowley, the oldest, led the pack astride a black gelding, the silver buckle on his belt glinting in the fading light. His brothers, Eli and Morgan, flanked him, with Deke Connors trailing behind, a loyal mutt too mean to die. They were the sickness that had rotted this land, one farm, one family at a time. The stranger stood in the middle of the street, a solitary figure carved from shadow and grit. The last of the sun had gone, leaving his face half in darkness, but his stance spoke clear enough. He wasn't moving. Not for them. Clayton reined his horse to a halt a few yards away, the animal's breath steaming in the chill air. "Evenin', stranger," he drawled, voice thick with amusement and menace. "Looks like you found yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ain't no one welcomes outsiders in Ash Hollow, especially ones who think they can play hero." The other men chuckled, their laughter sharp and empty. Eli spat a dark stream into the dirt, while Morgan thumbed the hammer of his revolver. Connors grinned, teeth yellow in the gloom. The stranger didn't answer. He simply unbuckled the leather strap over his rifle and let it settle into his hands, moving with a slow, practiced ease that made Mary Beth's stomach tighten. It wasn't bravado or show. It was a man who'd done this before, more times than he likely cared to remember. Clayton's grin thinned. "I asked you a question." The stranger's voice cut through the night, like the scrape of stone. "I ain't here for you. I'm here for her." Mary Beth's breath hitched. The word struck something deep in her chest. A memory of hands held beneath starlight, of promises made before firelight, and war stole them away. But this man was no ghost from her past. She'd have remembered those eyes. "You'll leave her be," the stranger added, his voice quieter now, though it carried clean across the empty street. "Or you'll be burying what's left of yourselves in this dirt come morning." Eli barked a laugh, raising his revolver. Big words for a man standing alone. But he wasn't, not truly. In that moment, Mary Beth felt it. Not courage exactly, but defiance. She pushed herself away from the tree, stepping into the road's edge, her legs unsteady but unwilling to stay rooted any longer. Her fingers brushed the locket at her throat, the cold metal a tether to what little strength she had left. Clayton's gaze flicked to her, and his grin returned. "Well now, looks like the widow's got a spark in her after all. Think you can hide behind this saddle tramp, Mary Beth? Ain't no one coming to save you." "I ain't hiding," she said, her voice raw but steady. "And you're not laying another hand on me." For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of wind curling through the gaps in old wood and brittle grass. Then the stranger moved. It wasn't a shout or a wild charge, but a precise, lethal thing. His rifle snapped up, the shot cracking like thunder, and Connors tumbled from his saddle before the others had drawn breath. Dust billowed as his body struck the ground. The surprised grunt cut short. Eli and Morgan fumbled for their guns, but the stranger was faster. A second shot sent Morgan spilling sideways, a red bloom blossoming on his chest. Eli's revolver cleared leather, but his hand never steadied. The third shot took him through the wrist, his weapon flying into the dirt with a clatter. Clayton alone remained, though his bravado had cooled, his eyes narrowing as his fingers tightened on the worn grip of his Colt. "Who the hell are you?" he snarled. The stranger's answer came slow, a weight behind each word. "Name don't matter. What matters is she's under my protection now. And you've run out of sins to crawl away from." Clayton hesitated, some instinct warring in him, the predator's arrogance against the survivor's caution. Mary Beth could see it, the shift in his jaw, the way his horse stamped at the dirt, sensing its rider's unease. And then, in a move born of sheer desperation, Clayton wheeled his gelding, spurring it hard toward the open desert beyond. The stranger didn't fire. He simply lowered his rifle, watching as the last of the Crowley name fled into the growing dark. The silence that followed was a living thing. Mary Beth stared at the sprawled bodies, her stomach tight, bile rising in her throat. Ash Hollow's ghosts had claimed new souls tonight. The stranger approached, his steps measured. He glanced down at Connors, then Morgan, then Eli, as if confirming the dead stayed that way. When he reached her, he held out his hand again, that same rough, scarred palm. "I told you," he said softly. "You'll never be alone." For the first time in months, maybe longer, Mary Beth felt the weight in her chest ease, if only by a fraction. She reached out, taking his hand. The wind stirred the dust. In the distance, coyotes howled once more. Night swept over Ash Hollow like a cloak, the last streaks of red and gold dying behind the far ridge. The air cooled sharply, carrying the dry, metallic scent of blood and dust. Coyotes called from somewhere beyond the dunes, their cries sharp and mournful. Inside what remained of the old saloon, the flicker of a single oil lamp cast long, quivering shadows against warped wooden walls. Mary Beth sat at a crooked table, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, though the cold had long since settled beneath her skin. She could still feel the ghost of the stranger's hand in hers, rough and steady, a lifeline pulled from the darkness. He stood at the window now, rifle within reach, watching the road, where nothing moved but the wind. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The stranger's silhouette was a lean, angular thing against the lamplight. There was a heaviness about him now, not weariness, but the quiet weight of a man long accustomed to bloodshed. His eyes, when they met hers, seemed carved from the same stone as the distant canyons. "I need to know your name," she said finally, the words catching in her throat. He didn't turn from the window. "Names don't mean much out here." "It means something to me." For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, with a low sigh like wind through brittle grass, he relented. "Call me Caleb." Mary Beth repeated it softly, testing the shape of it. Caleb. It wasn't a name she knew, not from this land or the scattered towns beyond it, but it fit him, in some quiet, necessary way. He moved away from the window, his boots silent against the floorboards. Setting the rifle aside, Caleb crouched beside the fireplace, stirring the cold ashes there. "They'll come for us," he murmured. "Clayton won't let what happened stand." "I thought you scared him off." "I did. But men like Crowley don't stay scared. Not for long. He'll gather what's left of his people, maybe pick up a few more cutthroats along the way. And next time, he won't ride up Logan." Mary Beth's throat tightened. She thought of the graves on the hillside, of neighbors buried by moonlight because the town feared to mark their passing by day. Ash Hollow had learned long ago what it meant to cross the Crowleys. "I can't run," she whispered. "I won't leave this place behind." Caleb's gaze softened. "I don't intend to ask you to." She studied him then, the worn lines around his eyes, the faded scar along his jaw, the way his hands never quite stopped moving, always brushing the edge of a weapon or the rim of his hat. A man like him didn't linger in places like Ash Hollow unless he had unfinished business. "Why are you really here, Caleb?" For the first time, a flicker of something close to grief passed over his face. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small, battered coin. The metal was worn, its surface dulled by time, but the etching of a sunburst remained faintly visible. "My brother," he said quietly. "This was his. Died 5 years back in a place like this. Cut down by men not so different from Crowley's lot. I've been hunting their kind ever since." Mary Beth's fingers brushed the locket at her throat, as if to ward off the weight of his words. She understood loss. It was written into the marrow of this land. "I swore," Caleb went on, his voice low and steady, "I'd never let another good soul die in silence, while men like Clayton Crowley walked free." Silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither dared say. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling loose shutters and tugging at the old church bell on its rusted frame. Somewhere in that restless dark, Ash Hollow's old bones seemed to groan in warning. Mary Beth drew a breath. "Then you'll stay." "I'll stay." Not just words, but a blood oath spoken in the hush of night, beneath a roof that had seen its share of broken promises. Caleb's hand rested over his rifle again, and she felt the weight of what lay ahead settle over them both. How long do we have? By sunrise, maybe. Maybe sooner. A cold knot formed in her chest. She'd lived through fear before, but this was different. This was a reckoning. We won't survive a fight alone. No, Caleb agreed. But we ain't alone. She frowned. There's no one left. The others ran, or worse. His gaze held hers. Fear'll make a man run, but it'll also make him fight when there's nowhere left to go. There's a few souls in this town still worth something. They just need to be reminded. Mary Beth hesitated. Could hope be kindled in a place so long smothered by fear? Was it possible to gather the broken, the weary, the defeated, and forge them into something stronger? A flicker of stubbornness sparked in her chest. I'll fetch them, she said. I'll go with you. No. She shook her head, standing. They'll come for me if they come for anyone. You watch the road. Caleb studied her a long moment, then gave a slight nod. Be careful. I've no intention of dying tonight. She stepped out into the darkness, the cold a slap against her skin, but she carried warmth with her now. The warmth of purpose, of defiance, of a promise made beneath blood and stars. Behind her, the lamp in the saloon window burned steady, and a figure stood watch. The night held its breath. Dawn crawled over the horizon in thin streaks of rose and gold, spilling across the brittle plains like a hesitant promise. The first light touched the jagged bones of Ash Hollow's buildings, painting the crooked rooftops and sagging fences in pale hues that did little to banish the cold. A hush hung over the town, a kind of terrible calm, as though the earth itself was waiting for blood. Caleb stood in the middle of Main Street, his rifle loose in his hands, his hat pulled low against the rising glare. Behind him, Mary Beth emerged from the saloon's doorway. A scatter of townsfolk gathered at her back, faces lined with fear, but eyes sharpened by something fiercer. She had done what Caleb hoped was possible. She had found the scraps of courage left in Ash Hollow's broken heart. Old Emery Kemp held his hunting shotgun with white-knuckled hands. Little Sam Dobbins clutched a revolver too large for his grip, and Eliza Crow, the blacksmith's widow, had an axe slung over her shoulder. They stood not because they believed they would win, but because the alternative was to be run down like dogs. They're coming, Caleb said softly. Mary Beth moved to his side, her fingers brushing his sleeve. She felt the tension thrumming in him, a coiled thing held only by will. You're sure? He didn't answer with words. Instead, he raised a hand and pointed toward the far ridge, where a cloud of dust roiled against the pale dawn sky. Shapes emerged, riders, a half-dozen at first, then more, their figures dark and ragged against the light. Clayton Crowley led them. He rode at the head of the pack on a broad-chested stallion, a blood-red bandana knotted around his throat, his wide-brimmed hat casting a cruel shadow across a face too lean, too long. Even at this distance, Caleb could feel the weight of Crowley's grin. It was a smile made for killing. Well, Emery muttered, spitting in the dust. Didn't expect to see another dawn anyhow. Mary Beth's jaw set. We hold this line. Caleb gave her a sidelong glance. If they get past me, you don't hesitate. Fight or run, but don't beg. I won't, she said, voice steady as stone. The riders closed the distance, the thunder of hooves a gathering storm. Caleb could make out faces now. Garrick, with his half-missing ear, Lyle Boone, mean-eyed and twitching, the Kellerman brothers, who spoke in grunts and shot before asking. It was a nest of snakes, and the nest was coming for them. Clayton reined up just beyond the hitching post outside the old mercantile, his men fanning out behind him like a dark tide. He looked at Caleb, then at the motley handful behind him, and let out a slow, mocking laugh. Well now, he drawled, if it ain't the ghost of Caleb Mercer. Thought I left you buried in Red Hollow. You missed, Caleb said. Crowley's smile twitched wider. You ought to know better than to come between me and mine. Move aside, Mercer. Got no quarrel with the girl, long as she knows her place. Mary Beth stepped forward before Caleb could speak. This is my place, she said, and you'll have to take it over my corpse. Crowley's grin faltered just a fraction, then twisted. So be it. Without warning, his hand dropped to his revolver. Caleb was faster. The crack of his rifle split the dawn. Crowley's revolver leapt from his grasp, the bullet tearing it from his hand in a spray of splinters and blood. The outlaw howled, clutching his mangled fingers. In that frozen second, everything hung on a wire. Then chaos exploded. The outlaws charged, weapons drawn, roaring like wolves. Caleb's rifle fired again, and one rider pitched backward, dead before he hit the ground. Emery's shotgun bellowed, and Garrett crumpled in the dust. The Kellerman brothers came on like oxen, one brandishing a club, the other a cleaver. Mary Beth fired, her shot catching Lyle Boone in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. Little Sam took aim at a rider's horse, sending the beast rearing, its rider thrown beneath hooves. Smoke thickened, the air filled with the stink of black powder and sweat. Caleb fought like a man born to war, moving with lethal grace. His rifle cracked, then became a club as he swung it into the face of a charging outlaw. Blood spattered across the dirt. Eliza's axe bit deep into one of the Kellermans, dropping him where he stood. The other howled and swung his club at Mary Beth. She ducked, the wind of the blow searing past her cheek, and drove the butt of her pistol into his throat. He staggered. She shot him through the chest. The battle became a tangle of bodies, the world narrowed to pain, fury, and the desperate will to live. When the dust began to settle, only 3 figures remained standing in the street. Caleb, breathing hard, smoke curling from his rifle barrel. Mary Beth, hair wild, her dress torn at the sleeve, eyes alight with something fierce and unyielding. And Clayton Crowley, blood staining his shirt front, a knife clutched in his left hand. He glared at them, hatred etched deep. "You think this changes a damn thing?" he rasped. "Another cruel come. Always someone worse out there. You ain't one." Caleb stepped forward. "Maybe," he said, "but it won't be you." Without hesitation, Caleb raised his rifle. Mary Beth didn't flinch when the shot rang out. Crowley's body hit the dust, and with it the long, smothering shadow he'd cast over Ash Hollow. Silence returned. Not the terrified hush of before, but something cleaner. A dawn reclaimed. The smoke lingered long after the last shot had faded, curling in thin, stubborn tendrils through the still, dawn-lit streets of Ash Hollow. The town, once lifeless and half-forgotten, now wore its scars openly, bullet-pocked walls, splintered shutters, and streaks of dark blood in the dust. But beneath the ruin, something new had settled in its place. Not silence, not fear. Resolve. Mary Beth stood in the street, the rising sun haloing her in burnt gold. Her dress was torn, streaked with dirt and blood, and her knuckles were raw where she'd struck down men twice her size. She hadn't realized how hard she was breathing until the hush made it audible, each breath a ragged thing. Around her, the surviving townsfolk gathered, what few there were, their faces marked by soot, sweat, and the strange, weary astonishment of the living. Caleb approached, rifle slung over one shoulder, a fresh bandage tied hastily around his arm. His face was streaked with grime, but his eyes, sharp and gray, held a quiet kind of pride. He stopped a few feet from her, their shadows merging in the dust. "You all right?" he asked. Mary Beth's lips twitched, a smile she didn't quite manage. "I'll mend." He nodded, and together they turned to survey what remained of Ash Hollow. The bodies of Crowley's men lay sprawled where they fell, soon to be buried or burned, their names already fading into the dirt. The battered townsfolk leaned on each other, bloodied but standing. The saloon's doors swung on broken hinges. The church bell, cracked but unyielding, hung in its crooked tower. From somewhere nearby, old Emery Kemp let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Damn me," he muttered. "We're still breathing." Eliza Crow wiped blood from her axe and spat into the dust. "Ought to put a sign up," she grunted. "Ash Hollow, last stop for bastards." The tension broke in quiet chuckles, a fragile sound, but honest. Mary Beth let herself laugh, though it caught in her throat. She glanced at Caleb, studying him in the full light, for the first time since the night's madness began. "You never told me your name," she said. Caleb hesitated. "Didn't reckon it mattered much. Folks who know me don't always wish they did. It matters now." He let out a breath. "Caleb Mercer." A ripple went through the older folk at the name, Emery straightened, eyes narrowing. "Mercer," he said slowly. "Thought you were dead at Red Hollow. Thought Crowley finished you." Caleb shrugged. "Almost did. Been hunting his kind ever since." Mary Beth understood then. The stranger she trusted on instinct wasn't just another drifter. He was a relic of those old frontier legends, a gunman with a price on his head, known more by the shadows he left than the name he carried. The kind of man mothers warned their sons about, or whispered about over drinks after the lamps were dimmed. And yet, here he stood, not a killer for hire, but the man who had saved them. "You came back for him," Mary Beth murmured. "All this time, you've been hunting Crowley." Caleb's gaze never left hers. Didn't reckon on staying. But this place, he glanced around at the battered street, at the ragged townsfolk still standing, might be worth more than a grave marker after all. The thought hung between them, unspoken but understood. Ash Hollow had changed overnight, bled for its survival, and now it needed a future. It was Mary Beth who spoke first. "We rebuild." Eliza snorted. "With what? Half the walls are kindling, the bank's empty, and most of us couldn't hammer a nail straight if our lives depended on it." "That's a start," Mary Beth replied, her voice steady. "We rebuild because no one else will. We bury our dead, fix what we can, and make damn sure no one like Crowley darkens our door again." Little Sam stepped forward, smudged and pale, but clutching the battered revolver like a talisman. "I'll stay," he said. "Help fix things." Emery gave a crooked grin. "Ain't got much better to do." One by one, the townsfolk nodded. It wasn't a promise made in firelight or with grand speeches, but it didn't have to be. It was the kind forged in blood and loss, the only kind worth a damn in places like Ash Hollow. Caleb leaned his weight against his rifle, watching them with a strange expression, a mixture of amusement and something heavier. Mary Beth turned to him. "You don't have to go, you know." He raised a brow. "I'm not much for fences and laws. Don't reckon the town council'd be thrilled." "You're the reason any of us are alive," she said simply. "That counts more than Oldson's out here." Caleb studied her a long moment, as if measuring the weight of the offer. The sun caught the dust in his stubble, the creases at the corners of his eyes. For the first time in years, the itch to move on, to stay ahead of a name he couldn't shake, didn't pull at his gut. Instead, there was a pull toward the half-burned saloon, the cracked bell tower, and the stubborn woman standing before him. "I'll stay a while," he said quietly. "See what needs doing." A ghost of a smile curved Mary Beth's lips. "Good." In the weeks that followed, word of Ash Hollow spread beyond the hills and canyons, carried by traders and mail coaches. They spoke of a ghost town where a widow and a stranger faced down the Crowley gang, where outlaws met their end not by the law's hand, but by their would-be victims. Stories took on their own shapes. Some said Caleb Mercer was a dead man returned for vengeance. Others claimed Mary Beth Collins had the devil's own luck and a bulletproof heart. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between. Ash Hollow rebuilt slowly. The saloon opened first, of course, its battered piano, still capable of halting tunes. The church bell was reforged and hung straight in its tower. New fences marked the edges of modest homesteads. Crops went into the earth, watered by sweat and sheer will. Mary Beth took over the land office, such as it was, and when a stray coach rolled through, she met them at the depot, rifle across her back. Caleb worked the forge with Eliza Crow, repaired fences with Sam, and quietly taught a handful of wide-eyed boys how to shoot straight when no one was looking. Life stitched itself together in stubborn defiance. One evening, as dusk bled into violet across the plains, Caleb and Mary Beth stood on the edge of town, watching the last light catch on the eaves and rooftops. "Never thought I'd see it," Caleb admitted. "A place worth dying for." Mary Beth slid her hand into his, fingers rough, but certain. "You don't have to die for it," she murmured. "Just stay." He squeezed her hand, and together they turned back toward the town. A new legend rose in Ash Hollow, not one born of outlaw kings or hired guns, but of stubborn survivors and those too mean to lay down. And in the years to come, whenever talk turned to hard towns and harder folk, they spoke of a ghost town that refused to stay dead, of a widow who wouldn't kneel, and a drifter who laid his past to rest in dust and blood. And when the wind came sweeping down from the hills, it still carried the faint echo of a promise, once made beneath the starless sky. You'll never be alone.